Hello, today I'm going to get you started making web pages by showing you the bare bones uh, three files that you'll need. You'll need an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file. And by the end of this tutorial, you'll make this website, which is a login and another screen. You made it in. Alright, let's get started making this thing. So the very first thing that you're going to want to do is make a folder somewhere that will contain all of your files. And so here I've just got a folder called website. It's on my desktop. That's good enough. Second thing that you'll want to do is download Notepad++, and it's totally free. Just Google it and get the one that you need. And it's just a really simple text editor with a bunch of built-in programming language highlighting features. So it's like it'll make your code colorful, and that's helpful. It's just a good thing to have. Okay, so I'll wait while you download that. And now that you've got Notepad++, first thing that we're going to do is create 3 different files. We're going to create our main HTML file, we're going to make a JavaScript file, and we're going to make a CSS file. And roughly speaking, the HTML is kind of the structure. It contains all of the main pieces of our web page. The JavaScript is kind of like the nervous system. It's the brains and the wiring. The JavaScript will do calculations and do dynamic whatever. So for example, when you click on a button, it'll handle what happens when you click on that button. Maybe it'll change the color of the background. Maybe it'll write some words. Maybe it'll increase your score. Whatever it does, JavaScript is that dynamic aspect, whereas HTML is more static. And then CSS is going to be the formatting and the styling. It's the lipstick that you put on your web page. And we'll use those 3 documents to make a functional and good-looking web page. So to begin, for whatever reason in Notepad++, you can't just save this, so you have to hit space or something. And now you can save this document. So we'll save the first one, and it will be called login.html. And then we'll create a new file, hit space, and we'll call this javascript.js. Then we'll create one more, and this one will be called style.css. So those are the 3 main files that you'll make for all of your web pages. Now, of course, you'll need a new login, or not login, you'll need a new HTML file per web page, but you can share the JavaScript and the CSS file among your various web pages if you want them to look the same, in case you'd share CSS, and if you want to have access to the same functionality, then you'd share the JavaScript file. So alright, so we'll start here with our login.html, and we'll just make the basic structure, and this is the structure that every single HTML web page will have. So it might be beneficial to make yet another file, which is simply this template. So I'll show you what that is. So at the very top, you write !document. Why? I don't know. I don't worry about it, and you shouldn't either. It's gonna be okay. Then you write HTML, and then you end that HTML. Why don't you have to end the document tag? I don't know, but it works. Then we make a head, close off the head, and make a body. Close off the body. So this is it. And we can make the spacing a little bit nicer. This is it. This is the template. So if you like, you can save this as a template. So let's do that. Template.html. So now when we want to, we can copy and paste that. So going back to login. Oh, it didn't save. I forgot to save before I saved as. So there we go. Now if you go into your folder, you can double click on your HTML documents and it'll open it up in your default browser. So here it's opened up in Google Chrome, and you can see that there's nothing here, and that makes sense. So let's go ahead and add something. We'll start with a button. And we'll write something and it'll have some text next to it. So we'll say text. Save that. Go back to our browser, refresh, and boom. There's our button. So what we want this to be is our login button. So we'll name it login, go back, login, perfect. Now we need two input fields. And an input is simply like a search bar, a text field, just a text box. Whatever you want to call it, that's what an input is. So we'll do in1 and in2. Save it. Here we go. We've got two inputs and the login button. Wonderful. Now, of course, we want these to be our username and password. Lovely. So like that's the basic structure here. So that's good. Let's make the button do something. So when we press the button, let's change the input. Let's write something in the input. Or better yet, when you hit the button, let's just write some text above everything. So we'll need a p tag, which I believe stands for paragraph. So here, let me show you that really quick. So here we have our p tag, and when we hit the button, we'll change this text. So let's do that. So when working with HTML elements in JavaScript, which we'll get to in a second, we have to give things IDs. Otherwise, we can't directly access those elements. Because if you wrote, like, change the words for the input, it wouldn't know what you meant, because here we have two inputs. So instead we give things specific IDs, which is by inside of this tag, we give our button element an attribute called ID. Or rather, it already has an attribute called ID, and here we're specifying what that actually is. So we'll call it login button. Simple as that. So now in our JavaScript, we can access, we can reference this button, and I'll show you how to do that really quick. So we create a variable called login button, and we go document dot get element by ID, and then we give it the ID. It's a login button. And these don't have to be the same thing, so we can just call this the variable button if we like, or something else. But for consistency's sake, I'll just call it login button. And so this ID is the very same ID that we just wrote here. And now we have a variable that points at that element. So we can manipulate it with JavaScript now. We can get different values, data about it, and we can change that data. Cool. So now this isn't doing anything, this is just holding on to it. What we want to have happen is we want to, when we click the button, we want to run a JavaScript function. Okay, so when we click on it, there's actually an attribute for buttons called onClick. And onClick specifies what happens. It runs a little bit of JavaScript, or a lot, or whatever, when you click on it. And you give it the JavaScript with a string. So here we could write anything that we wanted. So we'll give it a function to run, which we'll write in a second. And this will be login button pressed. Right? So on click, it'll run the function login button pressed. And now we have to go over here and create that function. So to do that, we create a function called login button pressed. And there we go. Now instead of having this variable up here, which would make it a global variable essentially for this document, I'll bring it down and put it inside the function for better scope management. Cool. Cool. Now there's one more thing that we need to do here in order to get this to work, because this HTML document has no idea that javascript.js, this file, even exists. So we have to tell it that it exists. And the way that we do that is we add another tag, the script tag, and we change its attribute src, which is source, to javascript.js. Then we end that tag. And this right here is what's gonna point to this file. So now we can run and access all of the functions in this document in this HTML file. Cool. To be sure that we've done this successfully, we have to do something with this login button. Otherwise we'll be running this function, but we don't see any real changes. So let's just make a change really quick. So this login button variable is an object, JavaScript object, and it's got its own attributes which correspond to the attributes here. So we could look up the ID, we could look up the onClick, or we could look up the inner HTML. And the inner HTML is everything between these two tags. So we're going to change that so that we can see a difference. So when we click the button, when we click the button, on click, it'll run login button pressed. Here's our function, login button pressed. It'll grab the login button element with this function and store the pointer in this login button object. Then we'll access the attribute inner HTML, which in the first place just says login, and then we'll change it to you clicked me. So if everything goes according to plan, when we click that button, it'll say you clicked me. Let's find out. So we're here, we refresh, I click the button, and it says you clicked me. Now what happens when I click the button again? Nothing. But actually something did happen, it just had no net effect. It did run that function again. So every time that I click it, it'll run that function. It'll replace the text with you clicked me. However, since it already says you clicked me, we can't tell. And if we wanted to, we could see how many times we've clicked it. So we'll make a global variable called click count, and it'll equal 0. And here we'll say you clicked me plus click count. And before we write that, we'll do click count plus plus. So we'll just add 1 to click count every single time, and then we'll show click count. You clicked me 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see that keeps going up because it keeps running that function. And we had to make this a global variable because if we just have click count declared here, it'll be re-instantiated every single time that the function runs. And when it's instantiated, its value will be whatever you set it as. So in this case, it would be 0. That's why it has to be a global variable, so it can hold on to that value. Alright, so I'm actually gonna get rid of this stuff because it's not what we want exactly. I'm gonna leave the function login button pressed, and I'll leave this reference, and then we'll go back to login HTML. So I never actually changed this p tag, but in order to do so, you would have to give the p tag an ID. So we'll call it p tag, and then you can use the same document.getElementById, by ID, and instead of login button, you'd say p tag. But we actually don't need that, and I was just going to use it for demonstration purposes, and instead we use the button. So I was scared of that. I'll give everything some more space. Now, the next thing that we want to do is when we call this function login button pressed, we want to check out the values that have been written in these two inputs. And in order to do that, we need these to have IDs. So we'll call this one username. We'll call this one password. So now going over here, we can grab this same thing. We follow the same format, so we go the variable username equals document dot get element by ID username. And now we've got this object to manipulate our username. So we want the same thing for the password. And now we can access the value of the username and password inputs and check to see if they match our login name. So let's go up here. We'll make two globals. We'll call it we'll call it user, I guess. So the user is going to be a string, and the user's name will be Darren. And Darren's password is going to be password 123. So now we can see if we have the correct user and password. We'll do that with an if statement. If username, and remember this is the element, so we need to access the value attribute, which the value is anything that's written in there, equals Darren. So if the value of the username is Darren, that's half of our criteria, so that's a good thing. And password.value equals password 123. Then we can do stuff. We can log you in. And since we don't have anywhere to go just yet, we'll change those values just so that we can see that something's happened. So we'll change the username to Daryl, which I don't think that's how you spell Daryl, but in this case it is. It's gonna work out. We'll change the password value to you got it. And these things are just placeholders so that we know that this has worked. All right. So let's see what happens. So our p tag's gone because we removed it. Now if we hit login, nothing happens because there's nothing even written here. So if we go Darren and password 123, these should both change, and they do. We have Daryl and you got it. Great. Now just to satisfy that the username and password have to be the right things, we'll write something else, password 321, and when we click it doesn't work. So great. Really quick, just for convenience, we're gonna go down here So if you wrote the right thing, then we'll do something, but if you didn't, we'll just clear out those inputs so you can try again. So we'll give them empty strings. Oh, you gotta refresh. So now when you type in the wrong thing, it just clears out those fields. Okay, great. So we're making progress here. Making good progress. So the next thing that we need to do is make our main web page that you can only access by providing the correct credentials. So let's make that. And here we'll go grab our template and throw it in there and save it as secure page.html. And this will be really simple, so we'll just give it p tag that says you made it in. Cool. Now to get there, we can do that with JavaScript, and in this function we do window.location.href equals securepage.html. And so this will just forward us on. It's like a link. All right. So let's try that. So we refresh to get the most up-to-date version. We type in nonsense and we get blanked inputs. Then we type in the real stuff. Darren and password 123. And boom, we made it in. So we've logged in to this much better page. That's very cool. So the last thing that we want to do is we want to do a little bit of CSS so that we can make everything look a little bit nicer. And the way that CSS works is you can format all elements of a type all at once. So that's kind of the point. But you can also do all more specific elements. So you could do an ID if you wanted to. And so this just keeps your formatting in one location, and you can change all the colors and all that in here. So what we'll do is we'll work on the body tag. So it'll change everything in here on both pages. So that works just by doing, you give the attribute, so this is the tag, body. Everything in these curly braces will be attributes that we'll modify. And we'll give it the color of green. Okay. And then we'll do something else. We'll do an input, I guess. Do an input because we have two of them. So you can see that they're both changed. And we'll give that a font style. So we'll give it font style of italic. Now nothing's gonna happen yet because our HTML documents have no idea that style.css even exists. So what we have to do is we give it a link. So this time it's not a source, it's a link. Or it's not a script, rather, it's a link. And we say rel style sheet, and this one goes in the head tag. Type is text slash CSS, and the reference is style.css. And so maybe you want to throw these into your template file as well. These links. So just so that you have them in the future and you don't have to keep copying that over and over. Of course, if you want to use different files, you change those here. Alright, and then one last thing, and then we'll test it. We'll add the link into our secure page as well. Cool. So let's test it. Let's see if it works. Aha, the background is green. That's good. No, are we italicized? Looks like it. It looks like I spelled italicized wrong. Darren, and password 123. If we log in, all right, the background's green. Perfect. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this useful, and if there's anything that was unclear or any other questions that you have, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll be sure to get back to you. Have a wonderful day.